That's right, folks. It's another episode of the Razzball Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Bobby LaMarco, here to break down another fantastic episode with the man, the Dynasty Trade Chart. Not even a legend at this point. You're like a mythical creature of the Dynasty of this universe. It's Richard Sickels. By the way, go check out his new Twitter handle, Richard Sickels GBM on Twitter or X. What's going on, Richard?
Not much, man. Just happy to be here. I've been excited for the last 24 hours to talk some Stefon Diggs.
Yes, Richard. That's what we call Richard's a professional, folks. He's not wasting any time. I don't even need to do transitions. Richard just does it for me. We're going to be breaking down Dynasty Trade Chart today. Richard made some updates. By the way, if you haven't checked it out yet on razzball.com, you go to the football tab, you go to 2024 Dynasty, go check out not only Richard's Dynasty Trade Chart, which, by the way, is a essential tool that we'll be updating all off season long. We also got Nate's Top 200 if you're looking for startup kind of rankings for your upcoming season, or if you're starting a new Dynasty League, great resource for Nate. But then if you hop over to the 2024 tab, our psychoness has already started. We have 2024 rankings, top 150, quarterbacks, running backs, everything you need on razzball.com, breaking it down every single week. So go check out all the rankings tabs. They're fantastic. Great resources. Get a head start on your 2024 season. Now, Richard, before we start diving into like trades, dynasty trade updates, let's just talk about the Stefon Diggs trade in a nutshell, NFL terms, whatever. Of course, he gets traded to Houston for essentially just a 2025 second round pick. And also, by the way, Houston gets a couple late rounders, day 3 picks. What's your first initial thoughts about this trade?
I was shocked, which I shouldn't have been. It was kind of like the whole process when Diggs got traded from Minnesota. When I was shocked then because I didn't see it coming. Like he kept tweeting weird things, and everybody's always questioning what does he actually mean by this tweet. And I just thought he was just tweeting just because he was tweeting. But yeah, next thing you know, he actually got traded. So I was kind of blindsided by it. But honestly, I love it. I love it for the Texans. I think that it's going to be great for CJ Stroud long run. I think it's going to help him out just growing as far as being, a sophomore in the league and everything like that. I think it's going to help break that sophomore slump that a lot of guys see. And I think that it was good for the Bills too. I think they got what they could before they didn't get anything for Diggs. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. No. I think it was good of them to at least get a second round pick for him. Yeah, I liked it. It was a good trade.
So here's my insane rant. In my opinion, there is maybe 8 teams you cannot trade Stefon Diggs to. Okay. In my opinion, your own division is one, of course. Then you got the Chiefs, the Ravens, the Bengals, the Texans are on that list. Where you're the Buffalo Bills. You have Josh Allen in his prime. Yes, okay. Stefon Diggs become a little bit of a headache. Things aren't working out. You need to get what you need to get for. But not only did you just make your team worse, you made one of your biggest rivals now. And if they probably don't think of the Texans as their rival, they should. CJ Stroud's the real deal. They won a playoff game last year. They are in the Final Four for the AFC last year. And now you just upgraded their team for this year. Not only that, like you just brought up too, CJ Stroud. Now CJ Stroud has a buffer. If for whatever reason, let's say take Dell's injury because he got hurt last year, he gets off to a slow start. Now you still have 2 alphas in there, Diggs and Nico Collins with Dalton Schultz. And also, by the way, Joe Mixon back there now, a solid running game to really help overall. Like Stroud is going to, at worst, continue the trajectory. Now, even if Diggs only stays for 1 year, that confidence that he built in this season, building up, getting quicker with his reads, being able more confident in his throws, I think this is just terrible trade by the Bills. Why would you trade him to one of the teams that, by the way, are going to impact you right away? You just made the Texans probably better, even better now for the next decade, even if he doesn't stay, because you're just building CJ Stroud's confidence. You're going to tell me that the New York Giants and Brian Daboll didn't get on the phone and go, hey, we'll give you a second rounder for Stefon Diggs. They probably didn't because the Giants want to just sabotage it. But I digress. So I just feel like it's absolutely absurd that they made this trade to one of the maybe 7 or 8. There's 24 other teams that you could have made this trade to, and it wouldn't have impacted you both times, because not only is your team getting worse, but now one of your biggest rivals just got better. So I think it's absolutely insane. There's no NFC teams. I'm sure the Rams or the 49ers, they'll give you everything. I mean, they love giving away picks. You're going to tell me, I mean, it's just like, I couldn't get on board. And the craziest part about the Texans, right? They do the renegotiation. So they renegotiate his contract. They move all the guarantee money up to this year. By the way, and if he leaves in free agency, they get a pick in the future.
Compensation, yeah.
Compensate. Yeah, they might get a compensatory pick, maybe a third rounder, maybe a fourth rounder. So they essentially traded Stefon Diggs, potentially a second round pick for maybe a third, a fifth, and a sixth. Like, I mean, even if it's just a year, it's an insane haul for the Texans. I love it for them just from a football standpoint. Now, fantasy football, not so much.
No.
Any thoughts about that rant before we move on to some of the fallouts for fantasy?
No, that was actually that kind of opened my eyes a little bit. I wasn't thinking about it like that for the Bills, from the Bills standpoint. I still don't think that I knee-jerk reaction. I don't think that it's that detrimental for the Bills, just because they're not in the same division and everything like that. But I get what you're saying. Like, as far as them being in the same conference and everything, yeah, no, that could come back to bite them, especially come playoff time. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Josh
Allen isn't 23. Like, if Josh Allen was 23 and still developing a little bit, I would say okay. But Josh Allen's in his prime. These are the most important years. Now, granted, with quarterback, you could be elite until you're, look at Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady. They were elite till their late 30s. So maybe that's the long-term look here. And maybe Diggs they weren't vibing. I get it. But just all the ripple effects of this is just interesting to me. Because now, when I talk about the Texans, I think the first thing we're all going to think about is, how is three alphas going to work together? Like, and so I actually did. Now, there isn't a lot of precedent. One of the things that came to mind too, and it's not to the extreme, but it's the Jaguars from last year with Calvin Ridley. So Zay Jones and Christian Kirk were both fantasy relevant in 2022. Both were in the top 32 in PPR points per game. And then they, of course, traded for Calvin Ridley. Ridley comes in, same offense, same everything. And then we saw there was an impact. Calvin Ridley was the wide receiver 28 last year. And then Christian Kirk was wide receiver 32. So in 2022, the top two receivers were wide receiver 20 and 32. So we saw like Zay Jones was in and out of the lineup till, he was not healthy last year. So you could even say, yeah, Zay Jones was not healthy all the time, but still, when you have a third receiver that dominates, that demands some targets, it's not just a throwaway like Quez Watkins was for the Eagles for years, maybe getting a target to a game. These guys demand 4 or 5 targets a game. But I think where it really, when I was doing my research last year, because I was doing this for JSN, is, you look at rookies, guys who got drafted in the first round. So I thought a lot about CeeDee Lamb when he got drafted in 2020. Remember the prior year, Gallup and Amari Cooper were both very good for fantasy football. There was a clear impact on that team the following year. But I think the most recent example is the JSN impact. Look at the Seattle Seahawks, right? They had DK, they had Tyler Lockett, both elite. Borderline, I mean, wide receiver 2s at least for fantasy football in 2022. They bring in JSN. And by the way, JSN wasn't even good for fantasy last year. He wasn't even top 50 in PPR points per game. But you saw the impact it had on a player like Tyler Lockett. Lockett went from 15.1 PPR points per game, wide receiver 16, all the way down to wide receiver 41. Now, DK Metcalf stayed the same. He was right around the same, wide receiver 24 to 23. So he was actually a little better, but he didn't grow. He didn't get better. He didn't do much more. So, like, that's what worries me, is that, like, now what do you do with Stefon Diggs? What do you do with Nico Collins? Because these guys were going in the first, I mean, Nico was going in the top 24-ish. Tank Dell maybe a little later because of the injury. But, like, what's your initial thoughts about Diggs, Nico, and Tank? Are you going to be kind of fading them in the top, 24 to 36 picks? Or do you think one is going to truly emerge in 2024?
So I dropped all 3 of them. Right off the bat, that was. I feel like they're going to be competing too much with each other, so I dropped all 3 of them in the trade chart. Nico Collins a little more so than the other 2. I think that the injury. I actually been seeing a lot on that injury, and it's kind of interesting about. Or I've been seeing a lot of people coming up with ideas, with takes about what they think is going to happen with that injury, and how they think that Stefon Diggs is coming in because of the fact that Tank Dell isn't going to be ready right away. And so that does kind of change things a little bit. Right now, I kept Tank Dell around total value points around 45. He's the most valuable out of the three, just given his age and given the production that he was doing before he got hurt. So I think that he's still the guy that you want there long term when you're looking at dynasty and stuff like that. But I think that Diggs and Diggs is going to be an immediate impact, and I think Nico Collins will still be good for this next year. I'm worried about him long haul though. I am.
This another thing I was thinking about too is because of the way they did the contract with Diggs, they technically gave themselves leverage with Nico Collins because Nico is up for a contract. So now they can look at the situation and go, well, let's see how everything pans out because they could decide if 2024 goes, let's say Diggs becomes the alpha and Nico becomes the second fiddle. Are they really going to want to pay Nico Collins and Diggs? They might want to keep Diggs. They might say, hey, we'll keep Diggs for the next 3 to 5 years. They could probably get a better deal on Diggs because he's going to be in his 30s versus a prime Nico Collins. Maybe they view it that way. Now, granted, I don't think any of us think of it that way. I think we probably would say CJ Stroud's in his second year, keep the young talent there.
Nico and Dell,
Yeah, exactly. But it just gives them leverage potentially in contract negotiations if they already have Tank Dell and they have potentially Stefon Diggs long term. So I do think there is something to that as well. But let's jump down to Buffalo. Now, I know Josh Allen is still your guy. Like if you look in your dynasty trade chart, he's still number one. The thing with Josh Allen is that he can use his legs, and that's what truly makes him unique, right? Some of it was the pass volume, the fact that he's a dynamic passer, he had weapons, and he's a runner. Now, he doesn't have the weapons as much anymore. So it's interesting that you kept him at 100. So is there any thoughts about dialing him back, or he's still going to be? Or you're going to wait for the draft essentially to see where you're going to put Josh Allen in the future?
Yeah, I'm waiting to see what happens with the rest of the offseason before I move him down. I think that I losing Diggs is huge. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Like that is a huge blow. But even towards the end of last season, from week 10 on, when Diggs met that biggest slump that he had, where he was only putting out about 9.8 points per game, Josh Allen still was putting up 23.9 points per game. Like he wasn't targeting Diggs as much, and he still was able to be one of the most dominant players on the field. So I'm not that worried about him. Granted, a lot of that is probably because of the fact that Diggs was on the field and he still was demanding that coverage that you need to that you have to respect him with and everything.
100%.
100%. But yeah, but I think that I think that Allen has finally, like you said, he's in his prime. I think that Diggs was great for Allen starting out, coming in young for that young quarterback and everything like that, like what we saw AJ Brown do for Hurts. I think Diggs was great for him in the beginning and everything like that. I think now we're going to see if Allen is actually the guy that we all think that he is, or if it was actually Diggs that was propping him up this whole time. And I think Allen's going to come out on top.
Yeah, there's been kind of a mixed, outside of Patrick Mahomes, when you take away the alpha wide receiver, it hasn't been great. You look at Ryan Tannehill, if you look at, by the way, Ryan Tannehill, a lot of people will scoff at the idea that Ryan Tannehill was elite, but there was a 1.5-year stretch where he was putting up ridiculous numbers, like 9 yards per attempt, crazy touchdown to interception ratio, and then they gutted his receiving core. Same thing kind of goes, if you're looking at Calvin Ridley, when he left Atlanta, Matt Ryan never really fully recovered. Those kind of things happened, and it usually doesn't work out. Now, Josh Allen, there is a very small sample size pre-Diggs with Josh Allen. If you look at his 2019 campaign, Allen was still very good. He was still very young, still very raw, threw for 3,000 yards and 20 touchdowns. And the reason why I bring this up is because that season, both Cole Beasley and John Brown were top 36 wide receivers. So I think, and that year, like I just brought up, 3,000 yards, 20 touchdowns. Josh Allen since then has been plus 30 in touchdowns and also throwing for 4,300 yards on average. So even with Dalton Kincaid now in the picture, I think Josh Allen is still good enough to prop up a receiver or two. So I guess the fallout is Dalton Kincaid the guy? And then the second question is, it sounds like based on your trade chart, Curtis Samuel's the guy you're leaning towards over Khalil Shakir. What's your thoughts about the receiving core at the current state?
Sure. So looking at Dalton Kincaid, I don't think that I didn't move him at all. I think that he's going to be about the same as where he was at before. I still need to see more from him before I move him up or down anywhere. Um, the Curtis Samuel, I was already. I know it's bitten me in the ass before, but I was already buying in a little bit on Curtis Samuel when I saw that he's going back to Joe Brady, and so I was already getting excited. And now that he's kind of the number one guy there, I think that he will be the number one guy there. At least right now. At least right now. I do see him actually putting up some pretty decent numbers this year. I didn't ridiculously bring him up, but I did bring him up quite a bit. He's now a total value of 28. So yeah, I like Khalil Shakir too. I kind of felt like when they brought in Curtis Samuel, they were bringing Curtis Samuel as a buffer in case Khalil Shakir didn't work out. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I think that I think that Curtis Samuel is going to be the guy there out of the two of them.
Yeah,
Out of what they have so far, anyways. I still think that they're going to bring in somebody else. That's the other thing about it. I still think that they either through a trade, through signing somebody, like through a trade with they bring in maybe like there's been talks about T. Higgins and things like that. Doubt it happens, but that would be amazing. Uh, there's still other wide receivers that are out there. Tyler Boyd, you got Michael Thomas still out there. You never know what's going to happen there. So I think that Curtis Samuel isn't going to be the number one guy in the end of things, but I do think that he will be benefiting quite a bit from this.
And listen, I'm all in on Allen too. So what I did is I basically made Allen. He's still my number one quarterback, but I put him right ahead of the number two, which is Hurts. Like he's no longer the clear alpha, in my opinion. This is really going to be like, do I still believe in Josh Allen? Yes, but I won't pick him a whole round ahead of any other quarterback anywhere. That's just my personal opinion with this situation. We'll see what the fallout is in the draft. Do they get somebody? Now, if the Bengals trade T. Higgins to the Bills, like how stupid is that? Like, oh yeah, I'm sure like that won't come back and bite me in the ass. Let's just let the Bills, soak in their mistake. Like, don't just be like, oh, here's your bailout. Here's your get out of jail free card. Here's T. Higgins. Now, the thing that worries me a little bit is that Khalil Shakir and Curtis Samuel are better suited in the slot. So both of them in their careers so far have been played better in the inside. And so that's what worries me a little bit. Like where I'm kind of looking at the situation is like, who's going to be the slot guy? Because I understand that the Diggs role is awesome. We know that. But like, is either one of those guys going to be able to fill that role? Do they move Khalil Shakir outside? Listen, maybe Curtis Samuel can be a poor man's version of it. I'm not saying he can't be, but both guys are better in the slot. So I think that Cole Beasley type role where one of these guys could just be the Cole Beasley and get peppered with targets like in 2019, that's still wide receiver 3 type player. And you're getting these guys in the hundreds, in redraft. And even in your scenario here, like in your dynasty trade chart, they're not going to be valued as top 36 guys in the short term, especially. So let's kind of get into some of that. So on your dynasty trade chart, we talked a little bit about, let's just focus on the Bills first. You got Curtis Samuel. You have him at wide receiver 43, value 28, which based on your trade chart is basically a 1.12. So you're basically saying Curtis Samuel for the last pick in the first round. Now, is that something when I say it that way, let's say you're a team that just won the championship and you're looking to acquire, you don't care about the draft, you just want to find a must-win now guy, you think Curtis Samuel for that 1.12 is a solid deal in your opinion?
Yeah, I do. I tried sending out some trades for with a second round pick for him, and it didn't pan out. I think that other people are seeing that same value of what just happened with Diggs leaving and Curtis Samuel being where in the position that he's in right now. I do think that he is going to be pulling that late round first, beginning second round.
So, and like you brought up too, that 2020 campaign with Joe Brady, the numbers don't jump out at you like crazy, but Curtis Samuel was the wide receiver 23 that year. Yeah. He only had 3 touchdowns, but Joe Brady used him in the ground game. 41 carries, 200 yards, 2 touchdowns. So that kind of usage would be awesome. And we saw Joe Brady really focus on the ground game in this latter half of the year. So maybe Samuel does get that kind of role where he's getting 200 yards on the ground. I'm not sure if that's going to be the case because you have Josh Allen also running, and then you have James Cook, etc., and then Ty Johnson. Hello. But then let's talk about Dalton Kincaid. You have him at tight end 5. Trade value is about a 41, which is about 1.08-ish range. It doesn't seem like you think the trade market's going to be hot on him right now. So what I'm gathering is you might not be acquiring him that much because you think that people are going to want a lot more than he's worth. Does that sound about right?
Yeah. I really like Dalton Kincaid, and I think that you got to take it with a grain of salt. Tight ends, they take a little while to develop. They're not going to come out right away. And granted, there's been a lot more things that have happened with Pitts, but just look at Kyle Pitts and everything with what we expected. I mean, the first year he came out guns blazing, and then he kind of fell off a little bit. Tight ends in general, they usually do have those growing pains and whatnot. So I think that Dalton Kincaid, especially now, given where the trade is at and everything like that, yeah, I think that people are going to be overvaluing him. But I think that I do think that he is worth that 108. Because you're 108 in Superflex redraft, you're looking at probably like Bowers would have just left, or would have just gone. Odunze would have just gone, and that would be about it. So I think Kincaid would be a good pick at that point.
The other thing about that trade though is, like, who is the Kincaid owner? Like, is the Kincaid owner a guy who is a bottom 4 team, bottom 5 team, right? So, like, in my opinion, it depends on where you are as a team. Like, if I am a win now team, I'm not trading Kincaid. This is the greatest news that ever happened to me.
Right.
But if I am a bottom 4 team and there is a fringe playoff team, like, I wouldn't mind getting younger and saying to myself, hey, I'll take the Bowers kid instead, and I'll trade. And if someone's willing to give me a top 5, like, I understand 1.08 is probably fair, but I'm talking about, like, if someone's willing to get aggressive and offer me like a top 5 pick for him in Dynasty, I'd be like, okay, I would consider it. But I'm one of the people that's all in. I'm all in on Kincaid. I'll probably be that person, be like, hey, here's a 105. I don't really care. Give me him right now. So I'm probably the wrong person to talk about that. Let's do one more trade. Let's talk Texans. You can pick whoever you want here. You got Diggs, you got Tank Dell, you got Nico. When you heard about Diggs landing in Houston, what was the first thing you thought about? What was the first Texans player you updated in your Dynasty Trade Chart? And what's kind of the offer? Are you selling, you buying? Tell us who the player was.
Sure. So the first one that I thought of was Nico Collins. And immediately I was dropping him. I'm selling him right now. I have him at a total value of 41, which is around a late first round pick. And there's a lot of buzz still really high on Nico Collins. So I think that you could get that late first round pick for him. Especially if you're not in contention right now, and you have Nico Collins, I think you could get a late first round pick for him, and you could find somebody that could replace him that is going to either be younger or be better in some way. Well, they're going to be younger either way, but I do think that you can find somebody that will be better in that range. Yeah. So also another looking at it from another point of view. I saw some of the tight ends in that range. You're looking at like Andrews, Hawkinson, your guy Kincaid.
Yeah.
So I would totally, if you can flip Nico Collins for Kincaid, I would do that in a heartbeat. If you're contending right now and you need a tight end really bad, I would flip them for Hawkinson or Andrews. And then looking at one of the packages that I put together for it, I was thinking around trying to get a second round pick, and then trading for like Michael Wilson, getting younger at the wide receiver position, try to find somebody love Michael Wilson.
I just wrote him up literally yesterday. The article dropped, I think, yesterday, that I wrote up Michael Wilson in my top 150. So yeah, nice. I'm in on that. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. No, I think that getting Michael Wilson for being the young guy and being in the position that he's in now, I think would be huge. And then getting that second round pick just to help bolster that, like, that'd be huge.
And listen, I think my opinion is I'm actually on the opposite side of these things with you because my thought process is I'm going to poach if there is any panic at Tank Dell owner. Because listen, Diggs' contract is 1 year. Nico Collins, by the way, in the last year of his contract, and he's only 25. And listen, I've said this about Joe Burrow, and I'll say this about CJ Stroud. Watching him play, I want as many players tied to that elite quarterback. Now, the only downside of the Texans is Bobby Slowick is going to get a head coaching job next year. Probably going to have. If the Texans play well, he's gone. Then hopefully they could promote Johnson. But if Johnson is a good OC, he's going to be gone. So it's the turnover at offensive coordinator that worries you a little bit. It's not like Kyle Shanahan where he's the head coach and he's constantly there, or Sean McVay where you're getting that consistency. So that is the one kind of long-term downside. But like Tank Dell, in my opinion, because of the injury and because of this, like I'm willing to. Now it's tough because I don't think 2.01 is going to get you Tank Dell. I don't think so. But if I am a team that's not going to win this year and I can offer an older, maybe more established player, like I guess my question would be if I can offer an early second and player X, like I don't know in your mind if you could look it up. Like what's 2.01, 2.02, and a player that's a good, solid veteran wide receiver to acquire Tank Dell. Is there a trade in your mind for that? Sorry to put you on the spot, Richard. You know what I mean? No, I'm trying. This is what I mean. I'm over here brainstorming a little bit. I'm thinking to myself, I'll take the red shirt year on Tank Dell this year with the injury, with the too much target competition, and I'll build for the future, and I'll offer up maybe my early second and then X player. Or even if I have an early, let's say I have a top 4 pick and I say to myself, I'll give you 1.04 Tank Dell and your late first or something. Maybe something like that could work.
Right. You know, I'm not seeing anything. The one trade that I did have with him was like a Mike Williams. I am interested in seeing Mike Williams with Rodgers over there in New York. So that would be one way to look at it. That was a second round pick and Mike Williams. So yeah.
So Mike Williams and a early second for Tank Dell. You think that gets it done? There's like asking for a friend type thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Ooh. I do. Well, okay. So when I was writing this up, I was looking at buying him. I'm more than willing to give that up. And now you're putting me on the spot and you're making me realize I need to look at that a little bit more.
Yeah. I think you might.
I would need something else. So yeah, no, you're right. I would need something else there.
Yeah, so I would say in that case, you're probably looking at the next tier up, maybe the Jerry Jeudy, Gabe Davis, Jameson Williams type players, even though Williams is a young guy. Terry McLaurin is another one where if I offered you Terry McLaurin in an early second for Tank Dell, that if you're a win now team, you're getting an early second, so you're not leaving the draft, but you're also getting Terry McLaurin for 2024. Now, it depends on what the owner is. Like if I'm a top 3 team and I have Tank Dell, I might not even care. I might be like, I'll take the redshirt year on Tank Dell. I got 4 other studs I could work with. But I'm just saying this is always going to be niche specific, right? There's going to be a team out there where I'm just saying now, like I'm willing to take a redshirt year on Tank Dell if there's any because like 2 months ago or even prior to the injury, Tank Dell was probably going to be way up your list. Like you're probably talking top 5 pick in the first round for Tank Dell minimum. If he continued on the trajectory, never got hurt, tied to CJ Stroud, nope, Diggs probably wouldn't even been traded. So that trajectory, and by the way, Nico Collins last year of his deal, Stefon Diggs, 1-year contract. 1 or 2 of those guys are not coming back. The Texans are not going to be able to pay both of them. So Dell's going to be, you might just have 1 down year. So I think this is a good opportunity to like look at that early second, maybe package a solid veteran like McLaurin or a Jerry Jeudy type, maybe even Keenan Allen, Marquise Brown types. Marquise Brown's now tied to Patrick Mahomes. Maybe that gets a deal done. All right.
I like that. Actually. Marquise Brown. I like that.
See, there we go. That's what our talking about. That's why we do the Dynasty Trade Chart. That's why we talk through this. By the way, if you haven't checked out Richard Sickels, trade chart. Go to razzball.com and check it out on the website. It's razzball.com. Hit that 2024 Dynasty tab and go check out the Dynasty Trade Chart that Richard's put together. Now, Richard, before we close out the show, tell the people where they can find your content, where they can find you on social media, and what you got upcoming at Razzball and everywhere else you write your content.
Sure, yeah. So you find me on Razzball, NFL side of things. You can find me at Fantasy and Frames, and you can find me on Twitter or X at Rich Sickels GBM. That is at Rich Sickels GBM.
Thank you, Richard. Well, that's it, folks, for the Razzball Fantasy Football Podcast on the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel. If you're watching on Twitter or X, go jump over to YouTube, subscribe, leave a comment, and let us know what your thoughts are on the trade for Stefon Diggs going to Houston. What's the fallout? What's your biggest priority in Dynasty for making a trade to acquire a Texans or Bills player? Once again, I'm your host, Bobby LaMarco. Go follow me at Twitter, at Bobby LaMarco, and go check out my articles too. I write sometimes. Thank you for joining us once again, folks. We are out of here.